The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows of Riverside High School as Marina Santos traced her finger along the edge of her notebook, stealing glances at Beatriz Oliveira across the classroom. Beatriz sat perched at her desk like royalty, her dark hair falling in perfect waves over her shoulders, her uniform somehow looking more like designer wear than the standard-issue polyester blend everyone else wore. Every movement she made seemed deliberate, graceful, as if she were constantly aware of being watched, and she was, by practically everyone. Marina hadn't meant to fall in love with her. It had happened gradually, like water wearing away stone, beginning with small moments. Beatriz borrowing a pencil and returning it with a smile that made Marina's heart skip. Casual touches during group projects that lingered just a moment too long. Conversations about nothing and everything during study hall. Each interaction added another drop to the reservoir of Marina's feelings until she was drowning in them. The bell rang, startling Marina from her reverie. As students rushed to pack their bags, Beatriz approached Marina's desk, moving with the confidence of someone who had never questioned their place in the world. "Hey, Marina," she said, her voice carrying that peculiar mix of honey and ice that made Marina's stomach flip. "I'm having a party this Saturday. You should come." Marina's hands trembled as she shoved her books into her bag. "Really?" She tried to keep her voice steady, casual, but her heart was thundering in her chest. "Of course." Beatriz leaned in closer, her perfume, something expensive and floral, making Marina slightly dizzy. "It wouldn't be the same without you. Everyone who matters will be there." She slipped a small, cream-colored invitation into Marina's hand, her manicured fingers brushing against Marina's palm. That touch sent electricity through Marina's entire body. She clutched the invitation like a precious artifact, barely breathing as Beatriz sauntered away, joining her usual crowd of admirers in the hallway. Marina waited until everyone had left before allowing herself to smile, wide and genuine, pressing the invitation to her chest. The next few days passed in a blur of anticipation and anxiety. Marina spent hours in front of her mirror, trying on different outfits, practicing what she might say. She settled on a dress she'd been saving for a special occasion, midnight blue, simple but elegant, something that made her feel beautiful when she wore it. Her mother had helped her pick it out months ago, before she'd gotten sick, and wearing it felt like carrying a piece of her mother's strength with her. Saturday evening arrived with the weight of destiny. Marina stood before her bedroom mirror, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, fell in soft waves around her face, the result of hours of careful styling. She'd applied makeup with trembling hands, trying to strike the perfect balance between natural and noticeable. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection. "Tonight's the night." The party was already in full swing when Marina arrived at Beatriz's house. More of a mansion, really, with its manicured lawns and gleaming windows. Music pulsed from within, and teenagers spilled out onto the vast patio, their laughter carrying across the perfectly maintained garden. Marina's hands were sweating as she approached the front door, clutching her small purse like a lifeline. Beatriz appeared almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting. "Marina!" she exclaimed, pulling her into a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and possibility. "You look amazing. Come on, I want to show you something." Marina followed Beatriz through the crowd, hyper aware of every brush of their shoulders, every backward glance Beatriz threw her way. They wound through groups of their classmates, up a sweeping staircase, and into a quieter part of the house. Marina's heart was beating so hard, she was sure Beatriz must be able to hear it. They ended up in what appeared to be a small library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and leather armchairs. The music from downstairs was muffled here, creating an intimate atmosphere that made Marina's pulse quicken even more. "I come here sometimes when I need to think," Beatriz said, running her fingers along the spines of books. "It's peaceful, you know?" Marina nodded, gathering her courage. "Beatriz, there's something I need to tell you." Beatriz turned to face her, and for a moment, Marina thought she saw something flicker in her eyes, something that looked almost like anticipation. "What is it?" Marina took a deep breath. "I like you, as more than a friend. I think I've liked you for a long time now, And I needed you to know." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Then, slowly, Beatrice's expression changed. The warm smile transformed into something else entirely, something cold and cruel that Marina had never seen before. "Oh my God," Beatrice said, her voice carrying a note of mockery that made Marina's blood run cold. "You actually fell for it?" She raised her voice. "Everyone, come in here." To Marina's horror, people began filtering into the library, dozens of their classmates, phones already out, recording. They must have been waiting just outside the door. Beatrice turned to address them, her voice dripping with theatrical enthusiasm. "See? I told you she was desperate enough to fall for it. Little Marina. So pathetic she actually thought someone like me could ever be interested in her." Beatrice's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Did you really think I'd want someone like you? This whole thing was a bet. And guess what? I just won $50. The room erupted in laughter. Phones flashed. Marina stood frozen, her world crumbling around her as she watched her most private feelings become public entertainment. Someone started recording a video, their commentary cutting through the general noise. "Oh my God, look at her face." Tears burned in Marina's eyes as she backed away. But Beatrice wasn't finished. "What's wrong, Marina? Didn't you want everyone to know how you feel about me? Well, now they do." More laughter, more phones, more humiliation. Marina turned and ran, her carefully styled hair coming undone, her special dress catching on the doorframe as she fled. Behind her, she could hear Beatrice's voice, clear and cruel. "Don't forget to post the videos. I want everyone to see this." She ran down the stairs, past clusters of partygoers who pointed and whispered, out into the night air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. She ran until her legs gave out, collapsing onto a park bench several blocks away. Only then did she let herself break down completely, her sobs echoing in the empty park. As she sat there, makeup running down her face, the humiliation slowly began to crystallize into something else, something harder and colder. She made a promise to herself, right there on that park bench. This wouldn't be the end of her story. She would return, someday, and make Beatrice understand exactly what she'd done. The weeks that followed were a blur of shame and isolation. Marina stopped going to school, claiming illness. Her father, still struggling with his own grief over her mother's recent death, didn't question it too deeply. He was lost in his own world of pain, and Marina's sudden withdrawal seemed to barely register. She spent her days in her room, curtains drawn, replaying the humiliation over and over in her mind. The videos had spread through social media like wildfire, turning her most vulnerable moment into a viral sensation within their school community. Every notification on her phone brought fresh waves of anxiety, screenshots of messages mocking her, cruel memes created from stills of the video, endless comments dissecting her humiliation. Marina deleted all her social media accounts, changed her phone number, and retreated completely from the world. Her few friends tried to reach out, but she ignored their messages and calls. The pain was too raw, too all-consuming to allow anyone else in. Instead, she focused on her promise to herself, letting it grow stronger with each passing day. During those long, lonely days, Marina began to plan. She would need to change, not just physically, but fundamentally. The shy, trusting girl who had worn her heart on her sleeve needed to die, replaced by someone stronger, someone capable of turning the tables on Beatrice. She convinced her father to let her transfer schools, and then, a few months later, to move to another city entirely. He agreed, perhaps sensing that they both needed a fresh start. In their new home, Marina began to rebuild herself, piece by piece. She joined a gym, learned about fashion and makeup, took classes in public speaking. She studied people, learning how to read them, how to present herself in ways that commanded respect. 2 years passed like this, each day another step in Marina's transformation. She grew into herself, finding strength in her solitude, turning her pain into purpose. The memory of that night never faded, but it changed from an open wound to a source of motivation, driving her forward. When she finally returned to her old hometown, nobody would have recognized the Marina who had fled that party in tears. Her hair was perfectly styled, her clothes carefully chosen to project confidence and success. She carried herself with the kind of assurance that only comes from completely rebuilding oneself from the ground up. Her first stop was to visit Julia, her childhood friend who had tried so hard to reach her after the incident. She found Julia working at the local cafe, looking much the same as she had 2 years ago, with her warm smile and kind eyes. "Marina?" Julia gasped when she saw her, coming around the counter to pull her into a tight hug. "Oh my God, I can't believe it's you." They sat together during Julia's break, the years melting away as they talked. Marina found herself telling Julia everything, not just about the night of the party, which Julia already knew about, but about her plans for revenge. To her surprise, Julia didn't try to talk her out of it. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes intense. "You know, after what happened with you, Beatrice got worse. She's made so many people miserable, Marina. Someone needs to show her that actions have consequences." And so began the next phase of Marina's plan, with Julia as her unexpected ally. Together, they began to piece together the reality of Beatrice's life over the past 2 years. What they found was fascinating. Beneath the perfect surface, Beatrice's world was cracking. Her family's influence had begun to wane, her father's business struggling in the changing economy. Her mother, always distant, had become even more so, drowning her disappointments in expensive wines and charity functions. Beatrice had maintained her queen bee status at school, but her power was built on increasingly shaky ground. "She's terrified of losing control," Julia explained one evening as they sat in her apartment, planning. "She's been awful to anyone she sees as a threat. Last year, there was this new girl, Sophia. Beatrice completely destroyed her when she thought Sophia was getting too popular. Marina absorbed this information, adding it to her mental file. Then we'll use that fear against her," she said, her voice calm and determined. "We'll make her see exactly what it feels like to lose everything." The plan they crafted was elegant in its simplicity. Marina would return to their social circle, but not as Beatrice's victim seeking revenge. Instead, she would appear as someone new, someone intriguing, the kind of person Beatrice would feel compelled to befriend, if only to keep close. Julia helped Marina perfect every detail of her reintroduction. They chose the perfect moment, a charity gala where all of the town's influential families would be present. Julia, whose mother was on the organization committee, made sure Marina received an invitation. The night of the gala, Marina stood before her mirror, but this time there was no anxiety in her reflection. She wore a deep red dress that caught the light like liquid fire, her hair swept up in an elegant style that emphasized her cheekbones. She looked powerful, untouchable. When she walked into the ballroom, conversations stopped. People turned to look, trying to place her face. She moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting introductions with a smile that revealed nothing. She could feel Beatrice watching her from across the room, could practically see the wheels turning in her head. It didn't take long for Beatrice to approach her, drawn like a moth to flame. "I feel like I know you from somewhere," she said, steadying Marina's face. Marina smiled, letting just a hint of mystery play at the corners of her mouth. "Maybe you do," she replied, her voice cool and confident. "I've been away for a while, but I grew up here." She watched recognition dawn slowly in Beatrice's eyes, followed by something that looked almost like fear. But before Beatrice could react, Marina turned away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Beatrice standing there with her perfectly manicured hand still raised in greeting. The game had begun. Over the next few weeks, Marina carefully orchestrated her interactions with Beatrice, always staying just out of reach, always leaving Beatrice wanting more. She let information about herself trickle out through carefully chosen channels, her success in her new city, her connections, her apparent influence. Beatrice, predictably, began to pursue Marina's friendship with increasing desperation. Each time they encountered each other, Marina could see the conflict in Beatrice's eyes, the desire to maintain control warring with her growing need to be accepted by this new version of the girl she had once humiliated. Marina played her role perfectly, gradually allowing Beatrice to get closer, all while gathering information. She learned about Beatrice's insecurities, her fears, the cracks in her carefully maintained facade. She discovered the truth about Beatrice's family, her father's mounting debts, Her mother's growing dependence on prescription medications, the constant pressure to maintain appearances at any cost. Julia proved invaluable, providing insights and connections that helped Marina navigate the complex social landscape they inhabited. Together, they watched as Beatrice became increasingly dependent on Marina's apparent friendship, desperate to be included in her plans, to be seen as part of her inner circle. The transformation in their dynamic was remarkable. Where once Beatrice had held all the power, now she hung on Marina's every word, changed her plans to accommodate Marina's schedule, desperately tried to prove her loyalty. But beneath Marina's cool exterior, emotions churned. Each interaction with Beatrice brought back memories of that night, of the humiliation and pain. Sometimes, late at night, she questioned whether her pursuit of revenge was healing her or keeping her wounds fresh. But then she would remember the cruelty in Beatrice's laugh, the way she had orchestrated Marina's public humiliation, and her resolve would harden again. As Marina's influence grew, she began to notice changes in Beatrice. The once confident queen bee became increasingly anxious, her perfectly maintained image showing signs of strain. She started making mistakes in social situations, becoming defensive when questioned about her family's declining status. Marina watched it all with careful attention, biding her time. She knew that revenge, like all things worth doing, required patience. She had waited 2 years. She could wait a little longer to ensure her plan unfolded perfectly. The opportunity presented itself sooner than she expected. Beatrice, in a moment of vulnerability, confided in Marina about an upcoming event, a crucial social gathering where she planned to announce her engagement to the son of another influential family, a strategic move designed to shore up her family's failing position. Marina listened sympathetically, all while knowing that this would be the perfect moment to spring her trap. With Julia's help, she began to put the final pieces into place. The night of the engagement party arrived, and Marina made sure she was the first to arrive at the venue, an exclusive restaurant that Beatrice's family had rented for the occasion. She moved through the space with purpose, exchanging quiet words with the staff, making final adjustments to her plan. As guests began to arrive, Marina watched Beatrice work the room, her smile becoming increasingly strained as she noticed certain key people were missing, people Marina had made sure would be elsewhere tonight. The son of the influential family, Beatrice's supposed fiancé, was conspicuously absent. Marina waited until the room was full, until Beatrice's anxiety was practically visible, before making her move. She stepped onto the small stage that had been set up for speeches, tapping a glass to get everyone's attention. "I'd like to make a toast," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet room. "To Beatrice, who taught me an important lesson about trust and authenticity 2 years ago." Beatrice's face went pale as Marina continued, her voice gentle but relentless. "You see, Beatrice arranged a similar gathering once before. She invited someone who trusted her, someone who believed in her, only to orchestrate their public humiliation. That person was me." The room erupted in whispers as Marina continued, each word carefully chosen. "But that's not why I'm here tonight. I'm here because Beatrice hasn't changed. She's still orchestrating elaborate dissections, like this engagement party, for instance. Would anyone like to know why the groom isn't here tonight?" Marina paused, letting the tension build before delivering the final blow. "He's not here because he never agreed to any engagement. In fact, he's currently announcing his engagement to someone else at another event across town. An event Beatrice knew about but hoped to overshadow with this fiction." The whispers turned into a deafening roar as understanding rippled through the crowd. Beatrice stood frozen, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the edge of a nearby table, her knuckles white with tension. The carefully constructed facade she had maintained for so long began to crumble before everyone's eyes. "But that's not all," Marina continued, her voice carrying over the murmurs. "Beatrice has been orchestrating similar dissections for years. Would anyone like to hear about the real reason her family suddenly renovated their summer house? Or perhaps about the truth behind her father's mysterious business trips to Switzerland?" The color drained from Beatrice's face as Marina methodically dismantled every carefully constructed lie she had built her reputation upon. With each revelation, another piece of Beatrice's social armor fell away. Marina watched as the realization dawned in the eyes of their audience. The queen bee had been exposed as a fraud. "Stop," Beatrice whispered, then louder. "Stop." Her voice cracked with desperation, but Marina continued, her tone remaining calm and measured. "I have proof of everything I'm saying," Marina announced, nodding to Julia, who began distributing folders to key guests, social leaders, family friends, business associates, bank statements, correspondence, photographs, everything that shows the careful fiction Beatrice and her family have maintained. The room erupted in chaos as people began opening the folders, examining the evidence Marina had spent months collecting. Beatrice's mother swayed dangerously, clutching her champagne glass like a lifeline. Her father had disappeared entirely, presumably to make desperate phone calls to damage control. Marina watched as Beatrice's world imploded, much like her own had that night 2 years ago. But unlike Marina's humiliation, this wasn't just about embarrassment. This was about truth, about consequences, about justice long delayed but finally served. Beatrice made a desperate attempt to salvage the situation, stumbling toward the stage. "She's lying," she screamed, mascara beginning to run down her cheeks. "She's just a jealous nobody who's trying to ruin me because I rejected her." The words fell flat in the face of the evidence Marina had provided. People were already turning away from Beatrice, forming small groups to discuss the revelations in hushed, scandalized tones. Marina could see former friends drawing back, creating physical distance between themselves and the falling queen. "I didn't do this out of jealousy, Beatrice," Marina said, her voice gentle but carrying to every corner of the room. "I did this because actions have consequences, because you needed to understand what it feels like to have your trust betrayed, to have your vulnerabilities exposed, to have your world torn apart by someone you thought you could count on." Beatrice's face contorted with a mixture of rage and despair. "You don't understand what you've done," she hissed, but the threat in her voice was hollow now, emptied of its former power. "I understand perfectly," Marina replied. "I understand that you've spent your entire life building your worth on other people's pain. I understand that you've never had to face the consequences of your actions. And I understand that tonight, that changes." The murmurs in the room grew louder as more details emerged from the folders. Marina had been thorough. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel act was documented. She had gathered testimony from other victims of Beatrice's bullying, financial records showing the truth about her family situation, even text messages and emails revealing the calculated nature of her social manipulations. Beatrice's carefully curated world was unraveling thread by thread. Former friends were already edging toward the exits, making whispered excuses. Social media was lighting up with the scandal. The very same platforms that had once carried Marina's humiliation were now broadcasting Beatrice's downfall. Marina watched as Beatrice's mother finally collapsed into a chair, her facade of elegant sophistication shattered by one too many revelations. Her father had reappeared, his face ashen, phone clutched in a trembling hand as he tried desperately to reach their family lawyer. The engagement party had become a funeral for Beatrice's social life, her reputation, and her family's standing in the community. Everything she had valued, everything she had used to justify her cruelty, was crumbling around her. Julia appeared at Marina's side, squeezing her hand in silent support. Together, they watched as Beatrice made one last desperate attempt to maintain control. "You'll regret this," Beatrice threatened, but her voice quavered. "You have no idea what I can do to you." Marina smiled, genuinely amused by the hollow threat. "What can you do, Beatrice? Share embarrassing videos of me? Spread rumors about my family? Turn people against me?" She shook her head. "You already did all of that, and look at me now." The truth of those words seemed to finally break something in Beatrice. She stood there, mascara streaking down her face, designer dress suddenly looking more like a costume than couture, and for the first time, Marina saw her clearly. Not as the untouchable queen bee who had tormented her, but as someone desperate and broken, someone who had built their entire identity on the power to hurt others. "I never meant," Beatrice started, then stopped, seeming to shrink into herself. "It was just supposed to be a joke. That night, at the party. It wasn't supposed to." "To what?" Marina asked quietly. To cause real pain? To have real consequences? That's the problem, Beatrice. You never thought about the consequences. You never considered that the people you hurt were real, that their feelings mattered, that your actions could cause damage that lasted long after you'd moved on to your next target. The room had grown quiet again. Everyone watching this final confrontation, Marina could feel the weight of their attention. But unlike that night 2 years ago, it didn't make her shrink or want to run. She stood tall, confident in her truth, in her right to speak it. I spent 2 years rebuilding myself after what you did to me, Marina continued. 2 years learning who I was without the fear and shame you taught me to carry. And do you know what I discovered? That I'm stronger than any story you could tell about me, any humiliation you could orchestrate, any pain you could inflict. Beatrice seemed to deflate with each word, the last vestiges of her arrogance falling away. She looked around the room, seemingly realizing for the first time just how completely she had lost control of her narrative. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered, more to herself than to Marina. Marina stepped down from the stage, moving to stand directly in front of Beatrice. "Now you do what I did. You rebuild. You learn who you are without the power to hurt others. You face the consequences of your actions, and you grow from them." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Around them, the party was dissolving, guests making their exits with backward glances and whispered conversations. Beatrice's parents had disappeared, presumably to begin damage control efforts that Marina knew would be futile. She had been too thorough in her exposure of their dissections. Julia appeared at Marina's side again, touching her arm gently. "Ready to go?" Marina looked at Beatrice one last time, seeing in her former tormentor's devastation not satisfaction, as she had expected, but a strange mix of pity and hope. Hope that perhaps this destruction could lead to reconstruction, that perhaps Beatrice could learn from this what Marina had learned from her own humiliation. "Yes," Marina said, turning away from Beatrice. "I'm ready." As they walked out of the restaurant into the cool night air, Marina felt lighter than she had in years. The weight of her past, of her need for revenge, seemed to lift from her shoulders with each step. "How do you feel?" Julia asked as they walked to her car. Marina considered the question carefully. "Free," she said finally. "I feel free." And she did. Free from the pain that had driven her for so long, free from the need to prove herself, free from the shadow Beatrice had cast over her life. She had come seeking revenge, but what she had found was something more valuable: liberation. The night air was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of jasmine from nearby gardens. Marina took a deep breath, letting it fill her lungs, feeling truly present in her body for the first time in years. The stars above seemed brighter somehow, as if they too were celebrating her liberation. "What now?" Julia asked as they reached her car. Marina smiled, the genuine expression that reached her eyes and lightened her whole face. "Now we live, really live, without letting the past define us." As they drove away from the scene of Beatrice's downfall, Marina felt no triumph, no savage satisfaction in her revenge. Instead, she felt peace, the quiet certainty that she had closed a chapter in her life and was ready to begin writing a new one. The streets of their hometown passed by the car windows, familiar but somehow different now, as if she was seeing them through new eyes. The girl who had run crying through these same streets 2 years ago was gone, and in her place was someone stronger, someone wiser, someone ready to embrace whatever came next. "You know," Julia said as they drove, "you could have destroyed her completely. You had enough evidence to do much worse." Marina nodded, watching the streetlights flash by. "I could have. But this wasn't about destruction. It was about justice, about balance. She needed to understand the pain she caused, but she also needs the chance to learn from it, just like I did." They drove in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. The night that had begun with revenge had ended with something closer to redemption, not just for Marina, but perhaps, in time, for Beatrice as well. As they pulled up to Marina's house, Julia turned to her friend. "Are you really ready to let it all go?" Marina looked at the home she had fled from 2 years ago, the place where she had nursed her wounds and planned her revenge. It looked different now, smaller somehow, less haunted by painful memories. Yes, she said firmly. The past is the past. What matters now is what we choose to do with our future. She stepped out of the car, the cool night air embracing her like an old friend. Above her, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small dramas of human lives, but beautiful nonetheless. Marina stood for a moment, just breathing, just being. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to define herself not by what had been done to her, but by what she chose to do. For now, though, she was content to stand in this moment of perfect peace, knowing that she had finally freed herself from the chains of her past. As she walked to her front door, Marina smiled, thinking of all the possibilities that lay ahead. The future stretched before her, bright and full of promise, and for the first time in years, she was truly ready to embrace it. The promise of that future began to unfold in unexpected ways. The morning after the engagement party, Marina woke to find her phone flooded with messages, not of mockery or cruelty this time, but of support and admiration. People who had witnessed her transformation and final confrontation with Beatrice reached out to share their own stories of bullying and recovery. She sat in her childhood bedroom, sunlight streaming through the windows she had once kept perpetually curtained, reading message after message. Each one reinforced what she had begun to understand the night before, that her journey had become something larger than personal revenge. It had become a symbol of resilience, of the possibility of transformation. Julia arrived mid-morning with coffee and pastries, settling cross-legged on Marina's bed like they used to do in middle school, before everything had changed. "So," she said, handing Marina a steaming cup, "have you seen the news?" Marina hadn't, but she didn't need to. Julia pulled up several local news websites on her phone, showing Marina the headlines. The story had broken wide open, not just about Beatrice's humiliation, but about the systemic issues of bullying and social manipulation in their community. Marina's evidence had exposed not just one person's cruelty, but an entire culture of privilege and power abuse. "They're calling you a whistleblower," Julia said, scrolling through the articles. "The school board is launching an investigation into bullying practices. Parents are coming forward with their kids' stories. You've started something, Marina." Marina absorbed this information slowly, sipping her coffee. She hadn't intended to spark a movement or inspire systemic change. She had simply wanted to balance the scales of her own pain. But perhaps this was how real change happened. One person standing up, telling their truth, refusing to be silenced. Over the next few weeks, Marina found herself increasingly involved in anti-bullying initiatives at local schools. She shared her story, not just of her humiliation, but of her recovery, her transformation, her discovery of her own strength. Young students listened with rapt attention, seeing in her story the possibility of their own redemption from similar situations. Meanwhile, Beatrice had disappeared from public view. Rumors circulated about her family's rapid departure from town, about psychiatric facilities and family counseling, about fresh starts in distant cities. Marina didn't seek to verify any of these stories. She had meant what she said about letting go of the past. One morning, about a month after the engagement party, Marina received an unexpected letter. The envelope was expensive, the handwriting familiar. Inside was a single page, covered in Beatrice's distinctive script. "Marina, I've started therapy, real therapy, not the kind my mother used to arrange for appearance's sake. My therapist suggested I write to the people I've hurt, but you're the only one I'm actually sending a letter to. You deserve that much. I won't ask for forgiveness, I haven't earned it, but I want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did to you, and to so many others. I understand the pain I caused, the lives I damaged, the person I became in my desperate need to feel powerful. You could have destroyed me completely that night. You had enough ammunition to ensure I could never show my face in society again, but you didn't. You gave me what I never gave you, the chance to learn from my mistakes, to rebuild, to become better. I'm trying to do that now. It's harder than I expected. Looking at yourself honestly, facing the ugliness you've carried inside. But I remember what you said about rebuilding yourself, and I hold on to that. Maybe someday I can be someone different too. I won't contact you again. This isn't about maintaining a connection or seeking absolution. It's simply about acknowledging truth, your truth, my truth, the truth of what happened between us. Thank you for showing me that destruction doesn't have to be the end of the story. Beatrice. Marina read the letter several times, letting the words sink in. She didn't feel the need to respond, but she carefully folded the letter and placed it in a box where she kept important mementos. It was part of her story now, another piece of evidence that transformation was possible, that people could change if they were brave enough to face themselves honestly. Life continued to evolve in unexpected ways. Marina's involvement in anti-bullying work led to opportunities she had never imagined for herself. She was invited to speak at conferences, to consult with schools on their policies, to work with parents and teachers on creating healthier social environments for students. Julia remained by her side through it all, their friendship deepening into something stronger than before. They had weathered storms together, held each other's secrets, supported each other's growth. Their bond had become unshakable, forged in the fires of shared experience and mutual understanding. One evening, as they sat on Marina's porch watching the sunset, Julia turned to her friend. "Do you ever regret any of it? The time you spent planning, the energy you put into revenge?" Marina considered the question carefully, watching the sky paint itself in shades of pink and gold. "No," she said finally, "not because the revenge itself was worth it, but because of who I became in the process. I learned my own strength, my own worth. I learned how to stand up for myself and others. I learned that pain can be transformed into purpose." She paused, watching a bird soar across the darkening sky. "And I learned that sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemy. It's about becoming so completely yourself that their power over you disappears entirely." Julia nodded, understanding. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, one by one, in the deepening twilight. The night air was sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine, carrying the promise of summer. Marina thought about the girl she had been, crying on a park bench 2 years ago, and marveled at the distance she had traveled, not just in time and space, but in understanding, in wisdom, in self-knowledge. She had embarked on a journey seeking revenge, but had found something far more valuable, herself. The stars continued to emerge, filling the sky with their ancient light. Marina felt perfectly at peace, knowing that her story was still unfolding, that each day brought new opportunities for growth and connection. She had learned that the end of one chapter was always the beginning of another, that life continued to offer surprises and possibilities long after you thought the story was over. As the night deepened around them, Marina and Julia talked about the future, about dreams and plans, about hopes and possibilities. Their conversation was punctuated by laughter and comfortable silences, the easy rhythm of true friendship. The world had changed, and they had changed with it, but some things remained constant: the strength they found in each other, the peace they had discovered in being true to themselves, the knowledge that they could face whatever came next together. Marina looked up at the star-filled sky and smiled, feeling the infinite possibilities stretching out before her. The future was unwritten, full of promise and potential, and she was finally, completely ready to embrace it all. The end of her story of revenge had become the beginning of something much more meaningful, a story of transformation, of friendship, of finding one's true self amid the chaos of life. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all.